of the river Styx. Here it's more like a marsh, a swampy marsh, mucky, muddy. Gazing intently, I saw there were people warranted within that bog, all naked and muddy, with looks of fury. Now, this fury here will be anger, wrath, right? Striking each other. So you've got these people stuck in mud, and they're punching and hitting on each other. It's an amazing word picture if you'll think about it, right? With a hand, but also with their heads, chests, feet, and backs, teeth, tearing, piecemeal. This will be the first of several times in Dante's Inferno when you have some kind of cannibalistic word picture. They're literally biting on each other, hitting on each other. My kindly master explained, "These are the souls whom anger overcame, my son. Know this, that under the water are found others." So in other words, you can see some at the very top, but there's actually some underneath the mucky water, whose sighing makes these bubbles come that pock the surface everywhere you look. Lodged in the slime, they say, "Once we were grim and sullen in the sweet air above. That took a further gladness from the play of sun. Inside us we bore Acadia's dismal smoke." Acadia, moral sluggishness, in other words. "We have this black mire now to be sullen in." So above you got the wrathful, who are outright angry all the time. Below you had those who seethed with rage and anger, maybe even depression. And down underneath, they try and talk, but the mud, the yucky stuff is in their mouth. So all we get are just bubbles coming to the surface. This canticle, they gargle from the craw, unable to speak whole words. Brilliantly constructed canto. At the beginning, we have words we cannot understand because Dante made them up. At the end, we have words that are spoken, but we can't hear them because they're just bubbling up through the mud. And then it's over. We traveled on through a great arc of swamp between that slope and the dry bank, all the while with eyes turned towards those who swallow the muck below. And then at length, we came to a tower's base. That's the end of the canto. By the way, for your notes, notice this. We've been messing around now with the sins of incontinence from circle 1 to circle 5, right? Think about this. We started with adultery. Francesca, right? Think about, though, adultery. It is a sin of a discipline, but it's a sin normally we think of where we're not trying to hurt the other person. We're just simply having the experience of exchange of fluids and all of that, the carnal lust and all of that. From adultery, though, notice, we went to 3 interesting sins. Gluttony, eating too much, the miserliness, and, of course, the wasters, the prodigals, right, who can't save anything. Notice, these are all 3 sins committed in kind of isolation. I mean, you do this all by yourself, right? To yourself, with yourself, for yourself. But then at the very end of this first major grouping of sins, the incontinent, we have the wrathful and the sullen, which obviously with rage like that and anger like that, that's very much about possibly harming another. Fascinating. Well, let's jump really quickly now to level 2 and 3. At level 2, well, I mean, there's so many obvious ones. Here, let's go to it. Wealth is obviously something that can corrupt your soul. It can take away even your identity. It can make you start to wonder who you are, right? I mean, later we're going to talk about the Scrooge story, Dickens' brilliant Christmas Carol. Think about the ways in which Scrooge, when he goes back to visit who he once was, he hardly can recognize himself. Back before he was Scrooge, that miser Scrooge, right? Think about greed and wastefulness. Both end up ruining our ability to communicate. We can't think or talk anymore well if we're so consumed with greed or always wasting what we have. The balance is the key, we might say, right? Think about another message, anger, right? Kind of destroys your soul and your spirit. Ultimately, it keeps you from being able to communicate. And then finally, another major message is, fortune is actually kind of an interesting balancing hand. In other words, all of this is somehow for Dante the way it's supposed to be. Notice already, this is important, Dante, as we'll get here in a second in 2b, Dante the philosopher is already trying to convince himself as Dante the poet. Everything works out the way it's supposed to, including my exile. Think about that, including my exile. The fact that I got thrown out of Florence and here I am living in exile, there's got to be something I'm supposed to learn. Remember what we said? Don't ask, why is this happening to me? But rather learn to ask, why is this happening for me? At level 2b, Well, the symbolism here, of course, the pushing of the rocks symbolizes how silly it is to fight against, over money, right, and stuff. The river Styx, or the marsh Styx, the river of hate, the river of anger, the river of rage. Notice it drowns you, it consumes you in some way. Powerful symbolism. The irony, of course, here is that we begin with language we can't understand and we end with language we can't hear. Language breaks down, and there can't be proper communication when we are so driven by the need for stuff, or we're angry and sullen all the time. When we're speaking about Dante, we said we talk about him as poet and as politician, and obviously as philosopher. Let's list that one really quickly. The brilliance of Dante as poet. Some of the most beautiful lines in our poem so far are happening now in Canto 7. Beautifully, brilliantly constructed poetry that will sing about the power of fortune to balance the world the way that it is. In other words, Dante, the poet, is telling Dante, the pilgrim, it all works out in the end, even exile. It all works out. Dante, the politician, whoa, he puts popes in hell? Are you serious with me? No, this is significant, okay? Dante, a devout Catholic, will say, we got some popes that probably don't deserve to be in heaven, and there's no way they're going to make it out of this circle number 5. That is to say, they cared so much about gaining stuff, circle 4, and possibly circle 5, for sure in circle 4, right? By the way, we're going to see popes in several of the circles of hell. Dante as philosopher, well, that's a fascinating question, right? I mean, how is it possible that our economies on this planet somehow find their way, and we go through terrible times of depressions, and then we come through and out of it into great times of financial growth? How do you explain that, right? It seems like that invisible hand of Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations does come to mind on some level. Let's jump down to 3a. Think about this one. In the Iliad, think about at the beginning of that poem how Achilles and Agamemnon got so mad at each other that they couldn't communicate. And later in the poem, when Achilles has lost his best pal Patroclus and he comes back to make his apology, do you remember what he blames it on? He says, I just got so upset, my rage. I was so consumed. Here we are with Dante. Think about in the Aeneid. At the very end of the Aeneid, Aeneas will jack Turnus. You'll remember this? But the question is this a wrathful act? An act of anger, rage? Sure seems that way on one reading. Remember, we talked about this. Or is it in fact a responsible act? It's what good leaders do. And by the way, remember that Aeneas does not find his way into these circles, but is rather in limbo. We've mentioned it already, so let's comment on Scrooge. Brilliantly constructed idea in the Christmas Carol. As he looks at himself back in the past, he's barely able to recognize himself. Of course, in the present, he sees that he's missing out, but he's just a little more upset. It's that third ghost, isn't it, that points at that tombstone and shows Scrooge his own tombstone. Shows Scrooge the way people will try and steal things from him, like his bed curtains or his watch. And it's at that point that he realizes none of it matters if you don't have love. And all the wealth that he's acquired, none of it matters if he can't use it to help someone else. Pure Dante, right? What for you is the favorite text to teach? Don't be greedy, right? Don't be angry. Don't just spend all of your money and give it all away. We can think about the classic, The Prodigal Son, no question, a text that we've given a lecture on. Certainly Dante knew the story as well of the young boy who takes all of his father's inheritance and runs off and blows it all and then comes back home without any money. Finally, at 3b, what is your view of spending? What is your view of conserving? Right? What is your view of being liberal with your resources or conservative with your resources? And how do you reach the happy balance? Right? We often will say to seniors, the best advice in your freshman year is don't get a credit card, and if you get it, cut it up and don't use it. Right? What are your thoughts on that one? What was a time for you when language broke down? You'll remember Proof Rocks. It's impossible to say just what I mean. What is a time when language broke down for you? You were either really upset, or maybe you were depressed or sullen, and language just didn't work for you. That notion of creating or inventing, by the way, your own language. Remember our poem Jabberwocky that we messed around with Lewis Carroll, where you invent language? We got something similar to that at the beginning of Canto 7. What was a time when anger destroyed you or somebody you know. You literally watched it happen. And you were like, dude, you're actually I don't even, a student once said about a pal, I don't know who you are anymore. It's like your identity is changing because of this sullen rage that you're just carrying around all the time. Of course, you got to let go of that stuff, don't you, right? Because if you hold on to that stuff, it will change you, won't it? It will somehow make you something other than what you really are. Well, there you go. Canto 7. Let's now turn to Canto 8. We're going to visit Circle 6. This will be at the walls of the city of Dis, D-I-S. We're going to have to ask, what's going on with that? And why all of a sudden, in the center of hell, do we have a city? And yes, of course, we'll be thinking about St. Augustine's City of God, that classic text, won't we? Thank you. I hope you're enjoying the study as much as am I.